So hello everyone, my name is Karen Redman, I'm the Mayor of the town of Gawler, and in this week's Gawler Conversations I'm speaking with Marie-louise Lees. Thank you for coming along today.
Thank you for the invitation.
What influences moulded you into the person you are today?
I was born in Loxton. My dad was a school teacher. He was sent to Taplin out in the Murray Mallee at the age of 18 with my mum, straight out of college to teach at a one-teacher school. And then my childhood was a bit nomadic, I guess. We moved from Taplin to Stockport, just north of Gawler, then to Peterborough, then to Renmark, where I finished my high schooling. So I think that sort of country lifestyle and also that where we moved every few years, that was a real impact on my life. So the biggest influence, I think, I mean, it sounds a bit trite, were my mum and dad, in that they gave me the view that I could do anything I wanted. And I was watching, there was a documentary recently about the women's lib movement, and when I look at the time that I grew up in, it was when all of that was sort of happening, and I think for them to put no barriers on what I could do with my life was an amazing gift. So I was your typical science and maths nerd at school, and probably the other influence, who I didn't mention in the first answer, was my year 10 and 11 chemistry teacher, science chemistry teacher. His name was John Brodie, and he, because I was probably one of the keenest students, particularly in that country environment, he actually suggested to me that I consider engineering.
So you applied for engineering. Was it a particular type of engineering?
Yes, I applied for chemical engineering as my first preference, and that's what I got.
So you got in, into engineering, clearly.
Yep.
And you started your course. So tell us about your university life.
Basically was in the city where I'd never lived, and I knew no one. So that was really tough, and also it was hard. For the first time in my life, I actually had to study. So it was the first few months were tough, and then one of the first year's subjects you have to do is a technical drawing, which as a left-hander I'm terrible at. But it was 4 hours on a Friday afternoon, and that was an opportunity to actually meet people, and I met a whole bunch of people. But one of the people I met was my husband.
A draw card.
A draw card. That's the only benefit of technical drawing. So, yes, yeah. So that life got better after that.
Did you consider giving it away and going back home?
No, I could see the end game was going to be worth it. I mean, first year university is something that you've got to get through, and it does get much better after that. And I could see what opportunities were going to be out there after that. And as I said earlier, I met my people. So, once I'd broken the ice, I started to meet more and more people who were like-minded and interested in the same things. And that was the first time in my life that I'd actually experienced that. My year 12 maths and my year 12 physics and chemistry classes, I was the only girl. I had experiences where, on occasion, when someone did better than I did at a test, the whole class would stand up and clap.
No.
And so there was some really tough stuff in that, but I had strong internal drivers to work past that, because I kind of knew that, where I wanted to be was not where those people were. So I'd built some resilience from that.
You're at university, you've met your future husband. Tell me about him.
So he's...
What attracted you to him? What's so good about him?
So he's an engineer as well.
I know.
So we had that. Not the same sort of engineer. He's an electronics and electrical engineer. He's a very analytical, probably where I get a bit emotional, he'll stay very calm.
So you finished university. How did you go? Not that it really matters with scores in university from my experience, but was that a factor? Were you wanting to do really well at university?
Yes, I tend to be fairly well driven to do well at everything I do. So I had a pretty slow start, but I ended up graduating with first class honours. So
I knew that would be the case. That was fabulous. You get your qualification, you graduate, and what was next?
I had a job with ExxonMobil, and because I went for interview practice, I was very relaxed. Bizarrely, they interviewed two of us at once, and the guy who was in the interview with just fell apart.
Oh,
and
no,
because I was just so relaxed, I just cruised through it. I got offered a second interview where they flew me over to Victoria, and I got offered a job. So that was a conundrum. So Graham had a job in Adelaide, his graduate job, and I'd been offered a job in Victoria. So there was a fair bit of consideration there, but the decision was that I would go to Victoria for 2 years, and then at the end of that, so we did the long distance thing, and at the end of that there was a decision to be made whether it was the job or the relationship. So we did month about where Graham would, and I was in sales, so it wasn't even as if I was in Melbourne, so 2 hours east of Melbourne. So one or other would fly over each month, and it was tough. There were really tough times in that, but I met a really great bunch of graduate engineers, some of whom that I'm still friends with.
And then then you came back. What happened then?
I got a job with Santos. So same industry in the upstream oil and gas industry, and Graham and I resumed having, being in the same state was really good, and I found that working for Santos was a much better work environment for me, and they have a great bunch of areas that you can work in, and so even though I ended up working for them for nearly 30 years, I didn't actually work in the same job for more than 3 years. And I worked out in the field. I worked on their assets in Bangladesh, in Indonesia. I worked on the Papua New Guinea LNG project, which was an extraordinary project to work on, as well as the Cooper Basin stuff. So over those years, I had an amazing experience. And it was lifelong learning. One of the amazing things about engineering is you don't get to a point where you think you know it all. In fact, it's almost the reverse. The more you find out, the more you realise you actually don't know. Companies change. I had a role as the Chief Reservoir Engineer for Santos, so I was basically technically responsible for all of the engineers that look after the subsurface, trying to find where the oil and gas is and manage it. And Santos decided at that time they didn't want to have that position anymore. So it was a very difficult conversation, and I asked the question, what happens if I don't take the role you've offered me? And the response was that I'd be made redundant. So I took some time to think about that and decided that I would actually take the opportunity to exit. It was a very stressful role. I was technically competent to do the role, but I wasn't politically competent. I was operating in a sphere of the company that it didn't work the way that I worked. So taking that exit was what I thought to be a good move at the time.
Having to unwind or untangle yourself from a company must have been quite an interesting time, challenging time, but also maybe liberating.
It can be an opportunity. You can either curl up in a ball or you can see it as an opportunity to do something else. And I've been really fortunate to have not just Rotary and other voluntary things that I do, but also taken a distinct veer off to the left in my work that I do now.
What attracted you to Rotary?
I think I grew up with a very strong ethos from mum and dad that, you know, you be part of a community and you contribute to it through volunteer organisations.
What are some of the strengths of Rotary?
The worldwide reach. If I can't do things internationally, another Rotarian will do them for me. The focus on, I guess, the ethos of doing good in the world through, you know, water and sanitation, maternal health, the project to end polio in the world. I mean, to be part of something that eradicates a disease from the face of the earth is pretty extraordinary.
You've thrown yourself into leadership positions within that service club. Tell us a little bit about why you were attracted to that.
Probably say I'm not a comfortable leader, but I end up there because I guess I can see the need for it and are willing to take myself to an uncomfortable place to do a job that needs to be done.
And that's part of being a leader is being uncomfortable and taking risks, because it's a huge risk being a leader, because, you know, as soon as you make a decision you upset somebody. So you can't hide behind, you can't sit on the fence, you can, but you probably won't.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're an engineer, you've got all that experience, you know how to problem solve, you've got methodical thinking. You had some time off, and I think I have this right. You then threw yourself back into consulting. Have I got that right?
So I work for a company called Energy Quest, which is like an independent little company that does an independent view on the oil and gas sector in Australia. And it's very part-time, but it allows me to scratch that itch that I still have for engineering.
What's your view on the future of energy?
The actual quantities of oil and gas needed are still increasing, and in fact since 2014 the oil production has gone from 90 million to 100 million barrels a day. So that's the concern, and it's very hard to substitute things like aircraft fuel with anything but oil. So I think there'll always be a place for it. You know, there's probably some engineering solutions for some of the other issues that are brought about by climate change. But I think people will have to actually change how they behave, or else they can't rely on people to fix it for them.
Yeah.
Otherwise it's just going to continue down the path that we're on. One of the interesting things is there's a strong correlation between quality of human life with access to energy. And there's still a lot of people in the world who don't have access to efficient energy. So there's that balance of, you know, they have every right to have that.
But what challenges as a professional woman have you had that, you know, may touch on that women's liberation or discrimination against women?
Of going out to a drilling rig and there's no female toilets and there's no female bunks. I mean, there are now, but there weren't then. And when I had my children, I think I was the first professional at Santos that had a baby. So there weren't policies in place. I decided I wanted to go back part-time, and the only way I could do that was by resigning. When I was offered my first serious leadership role, I did it on a part-time basis, and the man that I worked for basically said, I don't care how many hours you're in the office, it's about what the job is that you produce. And so I successfully did that at 4 days a week, and I was probably the first female that had done that.
Tell me about your family.
So Graham and I have 3 sons who are all in their 20s now. We managed to get 1 engineer out of the 3. Sadly, he followed his father's path and not his mother's. One's a psychologist come concreter, and the youngest is studying politics philosophy and economics at engineering, but has now decided he wants to be a nurse.
So thrilled to hear that they're wonderful people, because that's a big achievement. That takes work but support.
I think a lot of that's down to them. I think it's one of the lessons you learn when you become a parent, that you don't have as much influence as you think you're going to. But as my dad used to say to me, he said, you can ruin them, but all they need in the end is love. And if they've got your love, then they'll turn out fine.
Some advice to a young person going out in life, wanting to be a success. What sort of advice or information would you think would be useful for them?
So the first thing is to be brave. You don't have to be brave all the time, but every now and again you've got to do something that's brave and takes you outside of where your comfort place is. You've got to think about, I call it what floats your boat. You know, what makes you happy, and that can be quite a challenging thing to think about. Where do you want to live is another important thing to think about, and they're probably the key things. And I think, you know, the patchwork of life, as I said before, is made up of those points where you say yes or no to a decision. And if you always take the safe option, then you can miss out on some exciting things that might actually come from putting yourself in something that you're not quite sure you'll be successful at.
I think they're really, really wise pieces of advice, and simple. Basically, walk your own path, but be brave, be happy. Make decisions, which will always be risky when you make decisions. So thank you for coming along today. It's been fabulous talking with you.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.